Good morning, everybody. Just welcome to Masterplan Pathways in Existing Buildings. Welcome to a webinar about clean air or blowing smoke. We're on for the next hour, and I'm joined by Peter Kerr from Atelier 10, who will look at how we can change our approach to Masterplan design through the lens of climate change as a key design principle. This will be followed by Rob Valentine, who will discuss Bruntwood's approach to decarbonising their existing portfolio. And we also have Tony Ridderford from Architects Stride Treglown on the panel today to support the debates and the Q&A that will follow the presentations. My name is Andy McBain. I head up the Future of Workspace and Office Design team at NatWest Group. I'm a member of the BCO Management Board, the Occupier Group and the Scotland Chapter Committee. Peter Kerr is a director at Atelier 10. He's based out of Glasgow, host city for COP26. Peter has over 25 years experience of working in building services design. He has many interests, including circadian lighting, health and wellness in the workplace, assessing a zero carbon emissions future, and over the last few years, the integration and implementation of smart building technologies. Peter is a regional judge of the BCO. Rob Valentine is director of Bruntwood, the regional focused property company. Rob has worked for Bruntwood for almost 22 years, and he currently leads the teams in both Birmingham and Leeds. So Birmingham, Leeds, now they said Manchester. Bruntwood has been creating thriving cities for over 40 years. They recognise the need for long-term regional investment and support our cities and city regions in their journey towards net zero. In his spare time, Rob's a keen runner, cyclist and kayaker. He has a passion for exploring the UK in his camper van and going on long distance walks. Tony Ridderford is head of office and workspace at Stride Treglown. Tony is an architect. Stride Treglown became a B Corp and certified net carbon zero company in 2021. Tony sits on the Southwest BCO Next Gen Committee. Last year, Tony also sat on the New London Architecture Expert Panel for Work and contributed to the thought piece on how evolving ways of working have the potential to impact our wider urban and suburban fabric. COP26 starts in 5 days' time on Sunday, the 31st of October in Glasgow. Today, we'll start the presentations with Peter and Rob, and then we're going to open up for Q&A. Please post all your Q&A via the Q&A button. Okay, we've got quite a number on the call today, so raising hands, etc., is probably not going to work just because of the sheer volume. So please use the Q&A to post your Q&A and just post a question at any time. Don't wait to the end. Just keep them flowing throughout the presentations. So without further delay, I'm going to hand over to Peter, who's going to get the ball rolling and start agitating.
Okay, thanks, Andy. And as Andy mentioned, I'm probably known in Scotland in any case as a bit of an agitator and someone who challenges a little bit of the norms that we have, if you like, in terms of climate change. And actually, we'll be hopefully take you through that journey here. So, yeah, so this Masterplan Pathways journey, clean air or blowing smoke. So, obviously, you know, according to the Americans, sometimes that we see on the news, climate change isn't real, depending on who you see and who you listen to. But the reality of the situation is we're seeing things manifest themselves in a different manner in the last decade than we have, if you like, over the last 150 years. So although this is sensationalist news, a lot of this actually has some, if you like, elements of truth. And actually, when you look at the data, the truth is there to see. Now, we may be in, if you like, a global warming, if you like, a natural global warming element, but if you look at some of the ice cores that have been cut from the Arctic, the rate of change is significant in this period. And that fundamentally has got to do with us, you know, and how we occupy the earth and how we use the earth's resources. And we've seen it recently, you know, we've seen a lot of the heat waves, whilst we think they're fantastic. You know, in Scotland, we haven't seen as great temperatures as we have in the last sort of even 5 years. You know, but the issue is that these heat waves are obviously showing us that there is an imbalance, if you like, in the Earth's climate. And actually, we really need to start looking at this, more thoroughly. And actually, we really need to look at the detail and some of the challenges that we face and what we're doing in terms of to the planet. And actually, there's some good data out there in terms of this as well. So what I've tried to focus on here is the UK's, if you like, greenhouse gas emissions, because a lot of the time we talk globally, but we need to start dealing with our own, if you like, island first. And then we hopefully can actually influence global change. Now, in terms of some of the big issues that we have in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, so this guide here, which is actually from the the Greenhouse Gas Emissions National Statistics information, that's quite interesting. So this is related to the direct emissions of each of these elements. So for transport, it's what comes out, the back of the car. For energy supply, it's what comes from the power stations, right? So that's important. From business, that's in essence what comes out, the flues that we have connected in our buildings, and actually the refrigerant gases that we have in our buildings. And residential, this is related to again the flues. Those are the main elements that we actually, and when we're talking about master plan design, we have some influence over. So that's the kind of key elements that I'll be, if you like, kind of tackling as part of this presentation. So these are the kind of big elements that we see. So transport's the biggest element, and again, we have to be careful that we're actually treating that and looking at things the right way when we look at this transport energy supply business side of things. So some of that agitation that Andy mentioned. So current design approach that needs to change. So some of these things are quite difficult for maybe some of us to actually digest. But one of the things that I see is we generally approach master planning in a strange way. When we get developers and agents involved initially, there is an economic side of this discussion, okay, and I totally acknowledge that. But if we are creating new parts of cities, we really need to have a plan. And a lot of the time what we see is roads to nowhere. We have these plots created at the edge of our towns, and effectively we just have the roads and there's these plots off the side, and then what we do is we put in for planning and we try and get as much as we possibly can get away with from a planning perspective in relation to master planning, which isn't a great idea. And again, some of these master plans are worse. Some of them actually build buildings and they can lie empty for 10 years. And I've seen that effectively along the M8. I won't mention the project, but along the M8, I feel like, which is the big artery between Glasgow and Edinburgh, there was a site there with lots of nice new buildings that were nice and new 10 to 15 years ago, and they were empty for that length of time. So you can see the amount of energy that goes into creating buildings, and creating buildings that have no purpose is not a great idea. It's a master plan with no plan. So that's something that we need to think about and we need to change. The other thing, again, is the ego-driven architecture has to go. So I like to think of buildings as sitting respectful of their environment, and not just the environment in terms of the built environment, but actually in relation to the temperature and the climate conditions. So building glass boxes in really, really hot countries and really, really cold countries doesn't sound like a great idea, because we've actually, we've taken the clothes off, if you like, of the building. It's really challenging for that building, if you like, to maintain a comfortable temperature inside without us M&E engineers going in and putting loads and loads of energy into that building to solve the problem of that architecture that's been created. So our architecture needs to consider the environments, not just in a placemaking side of things, but also in relation to how we can maintain comfortable spaces within it, and also achieve all the kind of the nice aspirational aesthetic aspects. The other thing that we've seen probably over the last 20 years, more, and even more so in the last 10 years, is what I call badge-driven design, right? And as a Scottish colloquialism, chasing the ball, right? So if you imagine, if you like, kids football, right? What you see is the early stage of kids football, they all chase after the ball, right? Everybody chases it. And again, we're in a dangerous situation where this is how we are actually approaching building design. So we go, right, let's go UKGBC net zero carbon approach. Let's go well building standard. Let's go platinum Wirescope. Let's go passive house, right? So we chase that badge, but we're not considering the big picture. We need to be thinking about the big picture here, not just chasing the one aspect, but actually taking a step back and taking all the good things, if you like, from each of these, if you like, benchmarking schemes, because they do have good positive influences, but We need to stop considering them as just sticking a badge on a building and creating a USP for the agents to try and sell to tenants. We need to start thinking about these as actually having real meaningful impacts on what we're doing in respect to climate change. Energy performance certificates, again, when we're considering our buildings in a master plan context, is everybody talks about the EPCs, right? EPCs, you know, we want an A-rated EPC. Oh, you know, great, but it's completely meaningless nowadays, because legislation has not been kept up to date when we're looking at energy performance certificates, because the carbon factors that they talk about are totally different. So if you look at it, our current regulation is based upon mains gas carbon factor 0.216, a nice boring number, and 0.159, right? And then we've had two, if you like, draft amendments to this, and they haven't been passed. And you can see the trajectory here, that it's going downwards. But if we make decisions on the basis of EPCs, we're actually making the wrong decisions, because the reality of the situation is electricity is substantially better than gas, you know, when it comes to carbon emissions, you know. So we need to be thinking about reality rather than chasing, you know, certificates for the sake of chasing certificates, especially when they're meaningless. And this is just an example here. This is the actual CO2 emissions from the UK power grid up until 2021. So what we're looking at here is we're down at 181 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, right? So we can see that the electrical network is going down. And in actual fact, the trajectories that are provided by the Future Energy Scenarios 2021 document that came out actually indicates a net zero, well, it's an operational, if you like, carbon emissions of zero or negative carbon emissions by 2035 if you go all electric. So again, when we're considering our energy, if you like, supplies to our master plan buildings that we're creating, you know, we need to be mindful of these things. Now, the next thing is, I like to call it the offsetting carbon neutral fallacy. So another agitated statement here. So pollution is good because we're carbon neutral, right? And in actual fact, when you look at what carbon neutrality is talking about, it's about this, if you like, sequestration using wood, right? You know, which is great. I mean, it's a natural resource. It's in essence renewable and it's sustainable as long as we grow the trees, right? So I get it, and that's really good, and I'm really happy with that. However, a lot of the time when we're looking at our buildings and when we're looking at our master plan design, we're looking at energy centres. If we build biomass, for example, biomass energy centre, what we're doing is we're putting trees into that. We're feeding it with trees, right, and wood, right. And what we're saying is it's okay because the carbon emissions that those trees have absorbed all of that carbon, and we can burn it now. And what we'll do to make ourselves feel better is we'll actually put another tree in the ground, and that's us. We're carbon neutral, right. But fundamentally, what we need to do with climate change is actually limit what we're putting into the atmosphere. So if we're burning a tree, right, we're obviously saying it's okay, we'll actually absorb that carbon again by planting another tree. Is that really the right thing to do? I mean, that is the big question. Do we really think that's the right thing to do? Because in essence, we need to start looking at reversing climate change. We need to take carbon out of the atmosphere, not just being neutral, not just balancing the carbon, because we've already seen the impacts of what we've done, if you like. So we need to look at that in a bigger way. The other thing is we look at the material side. So materials are a big thing for me. The embodied carbon of materials. So actually, the things that in terms of embodied carbon of materials, what we're looking at is selecting a material on the basis of its impact on the environment, how it gets to our buildings, what it's made out of, and how much energy it takes to actually create that element. So this is an example of an insulation. I was just looking at insulation. So looking at insulation, so this is phenolic foam and mineral wool, right? And it's looking at the U value. So when we're looking at our master plan buildings, we're creating a framework for these master plans. What we're seeing here is that, you know, if we make the wrong decision and hyper insulate our buildings at this point in time, right, we will never pay the carbon that we've consumed making that material, right, by this 2035 date. So again, what we need to do is we need to look at what those elements are to actually reduce that embodied carbon. So it's our industry that creates the materials, our transport, right, the big transport question. So these things have to be changed. Then what we do is we reduce that embodied carbon content. Then we can actually insulate our buildings. So it's all about taking the right, if you like, the right time to make the right decisions. And again, this is one here is beware of the smoke. So it's climate change effect we put into the air. So it's actually looking at cleaner technologies that when we're doing our energy centres and looking at how we set up our master plan designs, is looking at technologies which don't cause pollution. So perhaps not put in the biomass, if you like, solutions, because again, there's a big flow, and unless you're using a thing called carbon capture technology, those gases are going straight into the atmosphere. And actually, this is a big impact in Denmark, which is 65%, if you like, of its its heat network that it has is biomass, because they moved it from natural gas to biomass. But actually, that's really made them, you know, in terms of their carbon payback per person, and that country is one of the worst countries in the world in terms of carbon emissions. So what we're trying to avoid is something like this, is actually having these biomass plants, you know, if you like, pumping out, you know, emissions, cutting down our trees, and actually just putting in little trees just to facilitate it. Well, we need to do something different from this. We need to be reversing things. The other thing is electric vehicles. So again, when we're thinking about transport as part of our master plan design, these are a big challenge, the electric vehicle world, if you like. And actually, the big question for me is that what are we actually feeding the habit, you know, of vehicle ownership? Because what we're trying to do is right, we're going to try and get rid of diesel and petrol, and we're trying to get rid of them. Then what we'll do is we'll just bring other cars in, right? Let's bring more cars in, but we'll make them electric, and that's great because that's how solve that emissions question, which is good. But again, the big question is it's not really solving the problem, which is the amount of transport we've got on the roads and the amount of, if you like, private ownership of vehicles. That needs to change as well. But in order for it to change, we need to provide master plans which make travelling to them a lot easier, and actually provide, if you like, safe and fantastic means of connecting through and into the buildings that we create as part of the master plans. And again, you can see this is, we're still on an upward trajectory in terms of transport. This is showing the way it is, and we're not really doing enough about this in terms of changing the transport habits, not just changing the fuel types. We need to change the habits. So that's a bit of the, I feel like, the moaning over, and looking into potentially some ideas for change, you know. So the way I'd like to think about, if you like, this whole carbon situation, as opposed to doing the carbon counting thing, think about it as a climate change story as opposed to a carbon story when you're looking at the master plan and you're looking at the framework. So actually look at the building in terms of what's the best thing for climate, right? So that's that journey that you need to embark on when you're designing the master plan side of things. The other thing is reducing this thing called urban heat island effect. So what this is see the roads that are dark and our buildings that are dark, right? What they do is they absorb, if you like, the heat that happens through the day. And then again, when you see this here, after sunset, they're still emitting the heat, right? So one of the things that we need to be doing is reducing that, if you like, that heat island effect. So actually changing materiality, how we design spaces, limiting the number of roads that we have, maybe decreasing the actual density of the spaces that we're creating, you know, putting the buildings further apart. These kinds of things will relax, if you like, that heat that's getting emitted, not because of the climate, but because of what we've done in terms of, you know, building buildings close together and putting roads in the way of everything. So these kind of things, again, you should consider, because it then allows us then to reduce the cooling effects in our buildings, and, you know, and it allows us then to create better, hopefully better, more climate reactive, if you like, spaces. Another little kind of analogy that I use, I like using analogies. So the buildings we create today are future existing buildings. So again, when we're looking at the building, and as opposed to, as I said previously, chasing the ball about materiality and everything else, we should consider actually, you know, if we build it, because everybody goes, well, body carbon, let's go timber. That's great, let's do it, right? But how many times are we likely to change that building over its potential life cycle? And how much energy will we consume? How much materials will we take, you know, from the earth in relation to adapting that building? So again, our master plan designs and the buildings that we create in our master plans and our framework, if you like, proposal needs to include this aspect of how we look at buildings for adaptability and longevity. You know, so if we have a framework, we need to be looking at this. And again, this year, the Three Little Pigs and the Big Bad Wolf is, because there's no point, there's actually a building in China, it's a timber building, and what they do is every 25 years, they rebuild it. So next to it, they build it, and then they knock the other one down, then they wait another 25 years, then they move it again. So but if we have more embodied, if you like, carbon in the initial stages, will we save ourselves total carbon emissions in the future? And again, it's difficult to you need to look at this yourselves, if you like. But this is a question that we posed as part of any master plan design and a framework, because again, the framework that we create, which I'll come on to in a second, is actually about informing, if you like, people and how we develop the actual master plan. Because a lot of the time, we're not involved, if you like, in the future, maybe 3, 4, 5 years down the line. But what we want to do is leave a legacy as part of developing that master plan. And we want to leave the ideas and hopefully influence the behaviours that come up against and make sure that they're aware of the decisions they're making. So design the buildings for adaptation, for longevity, and not just considering that day one embodied carbon content, but its life cycle carbon as well. That's a big thing. The other thing in terms of energy, as an MED engineer, should really mention a bit more about the energy, but community-owned energy strategy. So again, this is quite interesting. I've seen this happen quite a lot, especially again in the last 10 years. We've seen it a lot more, if you like, district heating networks. We've seen private wire networks as part of our master plans. So there's some private business that's maybe making some money there, right? However, who tends to pay for it is the tenants that come in and occupy those buildings that we create as part of the master plan. So why not include as part of that framework and the legal framework as well, associated with taking, if you like, plots or leases on a master plan? Why don't we make them part of the ownership model of that energy strategy? So a community-owned energy strategy. So if we're building a business park, make those tenants part of that whole energy strategy and that whole energy journey. And again, I think we should see more of that. That will then open up the potential, if we have the facility to have more if we want to put on more renewables from an energy perspective, everyone benefits from it, and some buildings will be better suited to it than others. But everyone can actually benefit from that, if you like, community-owned energy strategy. So again, that's another thought, for to look at it. And another big thing for me is this clean air approach to energy centre design. So picking energy centres and energy solutions which do not emit, if you like, pollutants into the atmosphere. They do exist, right? The heat pump, there's heat pump technology. They operate in a lower temperature, but what we should be designing our buildings to do is actually to be capable of utilising lower temperature heat solutions. And actually, in terms of the cooling side, we should be trying to limit the amount of mechanical cooling, because that's the next big issue in terms of embodied carbon and emissions in the atmosphere as refrigerants. And again, that's one of the challenges that we face when we're looking at these technologies. So again, this is another little picture. Instead of having the stumps, then we actually have the trees. We've not cut them down, and we actually grow more trees. So we actually go from carbon neutral to carbon negative. We actually start having a positive impact on our environment, and that's quite a big thing. We need to start reversing that cycle. The other kind of big thing there, I spoke about transport. Now, transport is a big problem in terms of how we approach our master plans and how we look at things. We need to start coming up with proper strategies for these. A lot of the time when we're working on master plans, we rely on the planners and we go, how much electric vehicles we include for how many car parking spaces? And it's the kind of mundane, if you like, thinking rather than the bigger thinking. So actually maybe consider designing master plans not to have cars going through them. And actually then we get rid of those, as I call them, roads to nowhere. We still have to service buildings, but there's other ways of doing that. I mean, things like grasscrete and things like that. If it's temporary use of the space, also look at, if you like, connecting more locally, the work and the residential side of things. We obviously a lot of people working from home, but if we can actually have master plans where we actually have, a mix and a blend of residential and commercial, mainly down to the reasoning that we actually have this lower car ownership model and actually not have copious amounts of roads going through spaces, and actually look at it that way, then that's maybe something that we can start to consider in a much more serious and considered way, because we need to start thinking about reducing transport, because it is one of the biggest impacts that we have at the moment. And that means then, taking all those elements, we can actually potentially have a master plan with a plan, rather than a master plan with no plan, and actually include that climate change response as part of it. Now, one of the challenges that we face when we're looking at designing master plans is that, we are reliant upon, if you like, the greater, if you like, networks to connect to that master plan. And again, again, we shouldn't just give up on that. We should actually, be challenging, our councils and even our politicians to actually do something different within our cities, and actually to facilitate this, because again, a lot of the time we can do so much, but it's difficult to bring public transport to a site if they don't see a business case in it. So again, that's a challenge. The other thing is if we have this blend, if you like, of having residential and also office use, and we have a blend of different uses, we have a thing called load balancing between offices and residential units. So for example, all of that heat that's in the offices that's produced, we could take that heat and we could start to heat our houses that are nearby. And what we've done is we've reduced the distance of that network because we've got residential and commercial next to each other. So actually considering how we can blend, if you like, different use types, and that way we can actually create load balancing and sharing of that heat. And then again, as I was saying about that energy, community owned energy strategy, we all can benefit, if you like, financially from this load balancing side of things. It could be quite powerful if we do it the right way. The other thing is especially in the likes of South England, water resource is quite a big thing. So again, we need to maximise the use of our water resources. And again, one of the other technologies that we can use is a wastewater heat recovery. So we can use these things like that as part of our district heat networks. We can actually include wastewater heat recovery. So because a lot of the time we take our showers and things like that, the water goes down the drain. That's really hot water, so there's energy there. So we can recover that energy. There's systems and solutions out there. And again, from a rainwater harvesting perspective, if we're trying to create fantastic green environments and create natural features that connect, if you like, this aspect of bringing public transport to the edge of our sites and then allowing us to walk and connect through or cycle through the sites, we want to create natural protection and things like, tree canopies and things for the walkways to connect to our buildings. But again, that needs water. So again, rainwater harvesting, and then we can reuse that water. Everything is about reuse. Any natural resource that we can get, any energy that we produce, we should be trying to produce. We should actually be trying to recover as much of it as possible, and then reuse it as part of that master plan. The other thing is about this over designing of spaces. We need to be very mindful of adjacencies, and we need to optimize things like daylight and connection to daylight, because it's got great, if you like, physiological benefits as well as, if you like, energy benefits. So again, when we're designing and we're looking at the massing of the master plans and the buildings that we create, these are things that we need to look at. So again, this is just a few ideas here. It's very difficult unless you've got a site to actually analyse all the benefits. But again, these are more to plant some ideas and ways of thinking as part of any designs in terms of the master plan. So some final thoughts, right? So again, I'm just hoping that if like COP isn't going to be COP26, because what we'll get is some world leaders. We usually would say all world leaders, but obviously they're not all coming. So that's how serious some of those countries take climate change. But what we need to be doing is we need to be using the badges, if you like, to inform decision making, but thinking about the design holistically. So there's some good things there, but actually taking all the good elements and actually creating something that's maybe different from all those, if you like, benchmark schemes, but is better. Everything ultimately has economic impacts, especially that energy strategy. But if someone's going to make the money, why can't it be the tenants? Why can't it be the people that are actually consuming that energy? Looking at the low energy solutions that are balanced with the impact of carbon emissions. So that thing I was talking about, where if we're looking at embodied carbon and we're thinking about changing the insulation, we're going passive house and things like that. Yes, we will reduce the energy consumption of the building, right? Yes, that will definitely happen. However, the impact in carbon terms could be worse for the environment in the short term until we solve those questions of transport and industry. So again, have a look at that and assess that. And the other big thing for me is it's not just about the buildings that we're creating, it's actually about the people who use them. So again, it's down to us, if you like, as if you like industry, if you like leaders, and it's actually to change behaviours of people and actually do it through good planning. So actually communicate the ideas, create that framework that was mentioned. I think that's fundamental, is create the framework for that master plan. And then that can help influence people's decision making when that master plan is I feel like, built out. Give the reasons and the approach, and then be strong about implementing it. That's the other thing. So that's me. So I will just hand over to Rob now. So I will just take the next. So Rob will take us through Bruntwood's approach.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name's Rob Valentine. I've worked for Brookwood, which is a 42-year-old business for 22 of those years. So I've got a role looking after our teams in Manchester and Liverpool, but I have a more strategic role within the business as well. And this is one of the key planks of our strategy going forward. So conscious that a lot of you probably don't know who Bruntwood is. As I said, we're 42 years old. We're privately owned. There's two core businesses within the Bruntwood group. We've got Bruntwood Works, which is primarily focused around commercial office buildings in our regional cities, which include Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds, and Birmingham. And we've also got Bruntwood SciTech, which is a business that's 50% owned by Legal and General, which concentrates its interests around tech and science parks throughout the whole of the UK, actually. So that that includes Cambridge and Oxford, as well as the regional cities I've already outlined. So we've got a portfolio of about £1 billion, and we've got a development pipeline of about 1.5 billion. Within that existing portfolio, we've got about 145 buildings. As I say, they're mostly within the regional cities, and they're mostly of different periods. So we've got a lot of buildings that range from Victorian times right through to the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. And we also have a development pipeline, so we're bringing out new buildings and new stock. And generally, we generally invest in our existing stock quite heavily too. So I think it's fair to say that we recognise that we've got a real challenge within our business. 80% of existing buildings that we see today in front of us, both commercial and residential, are going to be with us in the next 50 years. So we've got two strands to our carbon reduction strategy. One of which is how do we deal with new build and major refurbishments, and in some respects that's an easier challenge, as kind of Peter outlined there. The technology are coming through now that are allowing us to bring forward net zero carbon, both embedded and operational buildings. But perhaps the bigger challenge is how we deal with an existing stock, an existing portfolio. And as I said, we've got a very varied existing portfolio. So what I wanted to do today was not talk too much about what we're doing with the new build and the major refurbishment stuff, but actually look at how we're addressing our existing portfolio, because that's key to us delivering our commitment to having a net zero estate by 2050. So if we skip to the next slide, please, thanks. So to help with this, we've produced 3 documents, and these are internal documents, but they're actually core to our strategy and form a key part of our growth strategy. So everything we do in terms of our development and our investment links back to these 3 documents. So we've got the Bruntwood Guide to Net Zero, which is a kind of high-level overview. It's a document that's really useful for kind of for everybody within the business gets to understand the challenges that are in front of us. We've also got the Guide to Net Zero Operational Carbon. So that's the carbon that we use to run our buildings, maintain our buildings, heat our buildings, cool our buildings. And then the Net Zero Guide to Net Zero Embodied Carbon. As I say, these are embedded documents within the business and guide us in all our decision making. It's an extremely important first step. So if we skip to the next slide, please. Key definitions. So again, this is about communication within our own business, but also externally working with our supply chain. So a definition around what embodied carbon is, which is all carbon associated with physical construction materials, bricks, windows, and fittings and so forth. Operational carbon, as I said, is that kind of in-use carbon, and the carbon we consume and use predominantly for heating, hot water, cooling, ventilation, power, and so forth. And putting the two together, you've got the whole life carbon. Net zero is a carbon neutral position, and it refers to a balancing between emissions that we produce and those that we take out of the atmosphere. So it's kind of, and that's our game. The important thing that it's understood, these definitions are understood across the whole of the business, as I say, guides our decision making as we move forward. So next slide, please. So I think this is a really interesting diagram actually, and kind of highlights those the embodied and the in-use carbon and where they come from. So if we look at to the left of the diagram, we look at the embodied carbon. So it's the kind of production stage, if you like, construction stage. So the production stage is the stuff that we procure, the factories that produce the concrete, the glazing, the M&E equipment, all of that. How we procure that's really important. And that over time, that will become increasingly easy to do actually, because what we'll find is, and we are finding, is that the supply chain is advancing at quite a pace, and there's a recognition right across the supply chain that they need to be part of the solution, and if they're not, actually they're going to get left behind. And then there's the construction stage. This is kind of working with our architects and other professionals so that we can deliver net zero carbon solutions, embodied net zero carbon solutions. And again, the technologies that are being developed and the building techniques that we're now adopting are increasingly helping us with that particular challenge. And then we're into the use stage. So it's the maintenance, it's the repair, the refurbishment, the redevelopment, and then there's got all the operational energy that sits within that, as well as operational water. And again, there's a load of new technologies that are being developed to help us with this. We need to have an understanding of that and need to adopt them accordingly. And then you've got the end of life stage. So what do you do when you when that building is no longer serves a purpose and it needs to be demolished? And here we start getting into the circular economy. It's beyond building life cycle. It's into recovery, use, and recycling, and these are the principles again that we're embedding into our business. So if we skip to the next slide. So again, I really like this diagram because it's a great example of what a typical life cycle might look like. So if we're going to go to the left, we can see that there's a whole bunch of carbon that's required to build the building. That's the embedded carbon that we talked about earlier. And then you've got the in-use, the operational emissions, the energy and the water usage that we use over a period of time, say let's, in this case, up to 60 years. And then we've got replace and maintenance. So through a life cycle of any building, at times you're going to have to come in and reinvest. That might be new M&E equipment. It might be a replacement of a facade. It might be a major refurbishment. But all of those interventions we need to recognise require use of significant amounts of carbon. And then we talked about the end of life, so it's the demolition, another big bunch of carbon required in that respect. So if we do nothing where we stand today, if we move over to the circular diagrams to the right, so sorry, go back again, sorry Peter, thanks. We've got the operational carbon makes up about 66% of the overall carbon life cycle, and it's quite a big circle overall. If we go to an ultra low energy office, we reduce the size of the carbon footprint significantly, but the share of the operational carbon reduces massively from 66 to 28%. Next slide, please. So how we've gone about this? Well, we've got a dedicated team within the business looking at this, working with a number of professionals to help us, for us, establish best practice. And the first thing to say about this is, what measurement do we use? And Peter touched on this. And what we've decided to do is science-based measurement based on the Paris Accord. I think that's really important because there are so many different measurements out there. But if we go to science-based approach, nobody can argue with the results that and the challenge actually that's ahead of us. And I think there needs to be, in my view anyway, quite a debate about what, as a nation and globally actually, what measurements we adopt. And I work with a number of different cities, and it's surprising just how much of a differential there is in terms of thought and adoption of a measurement system. But we think this is the right approach. It's a challenging approach, but it's definitely the right approach. So the first thing we've done is benchmark our whole estate. So effectively what we've said is, how much carbon are we using and where are we using it? And then we're looking to adopt strategies to reduce that amount, and then embed those strategies within our business. And then there will be an element of offsetting. We will want to minimise that as much as possible, but that will be an important element. And then we need to monitor and verify. So we need to be able to demonstrate that we are actually achieving what we set out to achieve. On the embedded carbon side, so to the left of this diagram, we're looking at the benchmarking initially, avoiding technologies and materials that use a lot of carbon. So we're using sustainable resource from wood through to electric furnaces for our steel. Looking at hybrid frames, these sorts of things, earth-friendly concrete. As I said, the technologies are being developed, and then we're looking to reduce and replace the amount of carbon that we use, the materials that we use. So really looking very carefully about the tolerances, how thick our slabs need to be, for example. Can we replace a steel frame with a laminated wood frame? And then we're looking at how much offsetting we need, and then that monitor and verify. If we look at operational carbon, again, very important that we reduce, but we're also looking at generation. And this is a big project we've got on at the moment, how we can deliver on-site generation. That's challenging quite often because we've got buildings in city centres and relatively small footprints. It can be quite challenging to deliver anything above 10% of generation on site. So we need to look at, can we generate off-site, and that's something that we're working with a number of partners on how we might do that. And then we also need to look at technologies that allow us to store energy, so storage overnight in some kind of capacitor type infrastructure. And again, the technologies for that are being developed all the time. And it's all about procurement, a little bit of offset, and then back to that very important monitor and verify. Next slide, please. So the Brookwood Commitment in terms of carbon uses is one that we, by 2030, all of our new builds, all of our developments, and all of our major interventions, so that is major refurbishments, will be net zero. By 2050, our aim is to have a totally net zero estate. As I said, that 2050 target's the real challenge, simply because of the existing estate and how old it is and the technologies that it currently employs. So, business as usual. 1,000 kilograms of CO2 per metre squared across our buildings. Our 2020 target was to reduce that to 600. I'm pleased to say we exceeded that. Our 2030 target is to bring that down to 350, and then over time to get to a whole net zero target. So next slide, please. So looking at the benchmarking we've done and the work we've undertaken in that respect, we've analysed where we're using our carbon. So a lot of it goes into the substructure, so foundations and frame. Internal finishes tends to be quite a small proportion. The facade, significant. The MEP, quite small. And then the substructure, a significant element as well. And what we can see over to the right of this diagram is that actually there are elements of this, this carbon investment, if we can call it that will be long lasting. So one could argue that the foundation should be everlasting if properly designed. The structure itself should be 100 years plus. And if we look at some of my favourite buildings, the Pantheon in Rome, it's a 2,000-year-old building, still standing today, made out of concrete. So with the right approach, the right design, and the right quality, we can produce buildings that will last a lifetime. They need to be adaptable. They need to be flexible, but the capability within our industries is most definitely there. So next slide, please.
Robert Sandy,
yeah.
Can I just ask you to kind of wrap up in the next minute or so, just so we can get some Q&A?
Yeah, conscious of time. I'll be as quick as I can, in that case. So key metrics. So as I said before, if we want to get to net zero, actually, because we've got a decarbonising infrastructure, we're on this trajectory of reducing the amount of carbon we use, then that is an objective we can most definitely meet within the time frame we set by 2050. So how have we gone about this? So Trafford House is a building that we own just outside the Man United ground in Trafford. It's a 1960s building. It's about 250,000 square foot. When it was built, clearly it wasn't built with climate change in mind. So we've used this as a test bed. So we've been working with Ramboll for about 18 months now, testing to see how we can use this building to inform the rest of the estate, how we go on that journey to reducing overall, how we introduce technologies and investments to reduce carbon operational carbon with that building, so we can take it to a net zero carbon position. So quickly flipping on, and we've looked at a number of interventions in order to help us do that. I'll flick on to the next slide, which is perhaps a bit more informative. So if we can flip on, yeah. So we can see that it's got a VRF system, gas boilers. It's got a single glazed facade with limited insulation, and unlimited insulation in the slabs and the roof. Next slide, please. You can see that this typical floor, that on the southern elevation, it is it's open to a lot of heat gain in the summer, and on the north, a lot of cold air escape in the winter time. So next slide, please. So our pilot has been to looking at what interventions we need to employ to bring this particular building down to net zero. So to the next slide, please. So what we identified was that, yeah, clearly we need to get rid of the gas boilers, and we need to electrify this building, but also we needed to improve the facade significantly. And we're looking at a dedicated louver ventilation system or a high-level opening lift background ventilation system. Next slide, please. So we're about to now to press the button on this investment. It's multi-million-pound investments, but what it will mean is the replacement of the facade and electrifying the building effectively, because those are the two interventions that are going to take us on this journey. Massive capital investment, and not an easy thing to do, given this is a largely occupied building. But we've identified methods of doing so, and that's the commitment we've made. The important thing to say about this is that sets then the benchmark for the rest of the estate. So once we've done this, we can start, and what we are doing, we're looking at the existing estate using what we've learned here with this particular pilot scheme to introduce technologies and an approach that drives those buildings through to net zero carbon. So next slide, please. And what we find is actually that with the curtain wall installation or a double face facade system, decision's not quite been made yet, we will achieve those particular target goals. And that's me finished, Andy. Thank you.
Many thanks to Rob and for Peter for their presentations. We've got some questions that have come through on the Q&A, and feel free just to keep adding to those as well. I'm going to start with more of a general question that we had prepped. At least we've got it prepped. The people who I'm going to ask the question to don't, which is Tony, Peter, and Rob. So maybe just picking up on some of that last theme on Trafford House is how can we better recognise refurbishing existing building stock as one of the most sustainable solutions? So maybe fire that at Tony, because she's not had the chance to speak yet. So
Thanks,
refurbished
Andy.
buildings, there's lots of them out there. How can we really do a Trafford House right around the UK and right around the world?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? And I think we need to actually work together as a collective industry to educate and shift perceptions, because we were recently involved in an environmental study on a refurbished office building, and we calculated that it would take more than 100 years for an equivalent best in class new build to pay back the embodied carbon associated with its construction in comparison to our refurbishment. And despite this, the potential occupier that we were working with, they still chose to go with the new build. It was shiny, it was brand spanking new. It was able to achieve more bells and whistles in terms of accreditations on day one. I'm sure there are many complex reasons behind their decision and why they decided to go with the new build, but I think it's the whole industry coming together and recognizing that the benefits of retrofit over new build. Obviously, there are occasions where building new is necessary. And in those cases, I think what we need to remind ourselves is that they need to be as flexible as possible. We need to learn from the lessons of the past and not repeat the large scale visionary interventions that we saw, let's say, in some of the architecture in the 60s, for example, that now needs to be completely rethought. And I think that's picking up on Peter's point earlier as well about ego. There isn't a one size fits all answer. And I think the solutions, whether they're on a master plan scale or an individual building scale, will need to respond to the unique physical, cultural, social and economic context of their locations.
Thanks, Tony. I don't know if Rob or Peter, have you got anything to add to the question or the answer?
I'd like to add. So, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that we have to recognise that we can't demolish everything that's out there currently just because it's not net zero. That's not an answer. And we have to recognise there's masses and masses and masses of embedded carbon within the built environment. So, in order to reach our targets, we're going to have to invest in the existing stock and employ new technologies to help us do so, and that's going to require massive investment. I guess the other points I'd like to make is that we've got legislative pressures. If we don't put the investment in, then these buildings will effectively become unlettable or unsaleable. But I think more importantly, we're seeing market pressures. So we're increasingly seeing occupiers insisting that buildings perform at a certain level, and that's only that need, that desire from businesses, in my experience, is growing at quite a rate. So if we're not, and organisations are not investing in their estate to drive the net zero agenda, then what they'll find is that they'll, before they become legislatively unlettable, the market will just leave them behind.
Good stuff. I'm just going to jump to another question from Jeff Taylor that's on the screen there about district heating networks. So Jeff's been a developer for 35 years, and as part of that function with town planning permissions, he's quite often asked to connect to a district heating network. So question for the panel, have either of you seen successful district heating networks work in the UK?
Do you want me to take that one? Right.
Yes, please.
To be fair to Jeff, I agree, right? Because I'm brought in a lot of the time to evaluate district heating, especially when we're looking at offices, right? I think it's when we're looking at offices, it's very, very difficult to actually find a valid case for connection of an office to district heating network, because a lot of the time our offices are mainly cooling led. For a start, we've got hot water and things like that, but it's quite limited. The other thing is in a commercial perspective, the unit prices tend to be significantly less than what you'll be paying for a heat unit price. So the electricity costs are a lot less. And actually, you know, if you look at the older buildings, the gas costs are so much less than any heat network unit price. So the viability of district heating to connect for offices is, and I've never been able to come up with a proper business case or a carbon case for that matter. Because even if we look at electricity again, if we do, you know, air source heat pumps and it's all electric, the carbon emissions are a lot less, because a lot of the time the way that they get the financial viability of the district heat networks to work is to use things like gas-fired CHP, which is actually the most cost-effective way of delivering it. However, again, we're polluting the atmosphere, and then we're allowing the district heating companies to get away with that. So hopefully that answers Jeff's question, but to be fair, I agree. And whilst I'm talking about district heat networks, I'm more talking about it on a master plan scale. They do work, if you like, at residential scale, you know, because the unit prices there are so much higher. You know, the average price is around 19 pence per kilowatt hour for electricity. So if you can buy your heat for 10 pence per kilowatt hour, you know, that's a lot less. So these are the kinds of things, and everything, as I say, that chasing the ball and thinking one size fits all, it really doesn't. Everything needs to be evaluated on its own merits. So,
Tony or Rob, anything quickly to add?
Yeah, we where we can, we do try to hook into district heating systems, and you know that they are being developed in the regional cities at the moment, and there are plans to expand them in Leeds, for example, significantly. What we find is though that you need to have that balance. So it needs to be, you know, in order to be effective, it needs to be a mixed use development. So that's where you've got different demands at different times of the day. And that's when it works well. And for offices, so where they're producing quite a lot of excess heat, they can pump that back in to the district heating system, and then that could be utilised at night to heat apartments, for example. So it is a useful technology, but it's best employed in a mixed-use development, I would say.
And Tony, through the world of architecture, district heating networks?
I mean, it's something we've absolutely come across in many schemes recently. Is the need to connect to it, but no guarantee that that network is going to be extended to the location that the building is in anytime in the near future. And we have successfully been able to challenge that actually on a project recently, due to the kind of sustainability improvements of the actual systems that we were proposing rather to connect into the district heating. So I think, you know, there is understanding there. It's just that the policy doesn't really keep up, to be honest, with the technology.
Thanks very much. Now we have run out of time. There's 1 minute to go. So I'm just going to do a quick vote. Thanks to everyone who has posted the questions. Unfortunately, we've just run out a little bit of time to get through those, but just a big thanks to Peter, Rob and Tony for being on the panel today. Thanks for Bryony at BCO HQ for running behind the scenes, running the webinar, etc. behind the scenes. Just to call out that next week, the BCO in Scotland is running another webinar about the city of 2030. So it's open to everyone across the BCO. You'll find details on the BCO website. It's a top-class panel, which is chaired by Despina Katsakakis from Cushman and Wakefield, who is the junior VP of the BCO. And the panel includes experts and agitators from property investment, property finance, occupier sustainability, and Glasgow City Council. So the details are on the website. It's on Wednesday, the 3rd of November at 9 AM, and it's right in the middle of COP26. So I would encourage everyone to join up for that one. Meanwhile, thanks to Peter, Tony, and Rob, and thanks for listening.